fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren.
Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Okay, we're back, and joining us now is Chris Swinney, and he's the author of a couple of great books I've picked up, and we're going to talk to him today. So thank you for being on the show.
Hey, Al, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Oh no, I just it's our pleasure. So let's start out with before we get into the books, let's start out with you and who you are and kind of how you got into writing true crime.
Okay, well, I work in law enforcement. I'm married and I have 2 kids, but I've been in law enforcement for the last 15 years, and during that time, I worked specialized units, including narcotics and homicide. And prior to getting to true crime writing, I have another series called the Bill Dix Detective Series, which is crime fiction. And obviously, I kind of based a lot of that on detectives that I know. My 2 main characters are Bill Dix and Steve Peterson, and they kind of encompass a lot of the different men and women I've worked with over the last 15 years. So that's where I got those characters from. But as I was writing that series, I kind of made some friends and connections in the writing business, obviously. That series, all 3 of those books have been bestsellers as well. But I met an author and publisher by the name of R.J. Parker, and he just basically kind of put the bug in my ear about writing true crime. He basically said, "Hey, Chris, you write crime reports, you're around crime. Have you ever considered writing true crime?" And I kind of fought it for a while, to be honest with you, because, at my job I do enough crime reports, and I didn't really want to, keep writing crime, if you will. But, after reading some of the stuff, I started reading Ann Rule and some of the other noteworthy true crime kind of authors. I started getting kind of interested in it again, so I started writing short stories, kind of true crime related. And then I just came up with a topic one day with R.J. Parker. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to start this series. I'd like you to write the first book in the series." And there's this guy named Robert Picton who is a serial killer. And honestly, I did not know anything about Robert Picton. But these serial killers that R.J. is talking about are based in Canada. So, like doing an investigation in patrol or in one of the specialized units that I was a part of, I just started collecting as much data as I possibly could, and then tried to start interviewing people related to that case, and then came up with a format that I got from RJ as far as how he wanted the book to flow. And then I just cranked it out like a long police report, basically.
Well, where were you, obviously, so where do you, how do I say this? Where were you working in law enforcement? What part of the country?
I work in the San Francisco Bay Area. I work for the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, which is right along the peninsula.
Okay.
Just south of San Francisco, maybe about 30 miles south of San Francisco.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So you had no idea about the Canadian serial killer that Robert Picton.
Yeah, I had no idea. The ones I knew about were, folks closer to home, maybe in Washington, Seattle area, or even in California. But I didn't know anything about Robert Picton.
Yeah. That was pretty brutal.
Oh yeah.
So great. So now when you how do I say this? So how do you not get too involved in the case that you cover? Because being in law enforcement, you can't help but be somewhat involved. But
right.
When you're doing a case for a book, does that sort of trigger the same feelings?
Yeah, it definitely does, and I get this question asked quite a bit because, some of the people have seen that the books have done well, and they question, hey, why are you doing this? What is the motive? And to be honest with you, the motive is twofold. One, I want to get the story out there so that if somebody in the general public or even in law enforcement sees somebody exhibiting these types of behaviors, we may be able to thwart some type of serial killer or some type of attack. But I do get definitely involved with these cases. I realize as I'm writing them, for example, in the Robert Picton case, a lot of his victims, many people in society wouldn't call victims because they were working girls, they were prostitutes, they were drug addicts. But for me, if a crime is committed against somebody, that's still a crime. So I kind of got involved with that. And so one of the ways I helped myself deal with that was I donate all the proceeds from the book sales for that book, actually for all the books I write, but for that specific book, I donate proceeds to women's shelters and victims of violent crime. So I kind of give, I do the investigation, I get attached to these victims, I do it for awareness, and then kind of my little thing to do is to donate the proceeds to various victim groups to try to help, women going through maybe not serial killing, but similar kind of violent situations.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's very, very commendable. That's so when you go to a case, so such as the Robert Picton, so that was your one book that came out earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
Did you actually go to Canada then and start to talk to people?
No, I did all my stuff through either phone interviews or emailing, or I would use friends that I've made over the years through social media to go contact people. But it was kind of tough because a lot of these people that were involved with these cases have retired. And so it's hard to find a retired law enforcement official, whether it's in the United States or in Canada.
Yeah.
So I would have to contact like the Toronto Star and various newspapers up there, try to get a hold of people who wrote those stories at the time, and then kind of just bug them a little bit. And some folks never responded, but others would, and so you would just try to really extract whatever little piece of information you get that might be unique to that case. So that's kind of how I did it.
Yeah, and so how when you do something like that too, how do people respond to you? So you, like when you're writing a book and you're kind of doing research, and so you talk to victims' families or cops or anybody in that sort of that were related to the crime. Are they kind of open to that?
It's kind of interesting. It's a good question. The way it kind of goes is everybody, how everybody has a different personality? Well, the same is true with talking to people about these crimes. I've had some family members not respond at all. I've had some respond and tell me that it's a waste of time and, don't do this. We don't want to rehash old wounds. That kind of response. I've had some that have been advocates. You have some family members who have had somebody pass away or been murdered, like in the pig farmer case. He said he killed 49 people, but most people involved with that case think that number could be over 200. And some of those families are supportive of people writing about it because they know, at least in my case, I'm not trying to glorify it to make $1 because I donate my proceeds. So some have been receptive, but I've had the door, so to speak, shut in my face. And then on law enforcement side, you have some guys who are similar as far as they will help you out, and others who won't. I'm investigating a case right now that occurred in the United Kingdom, and obviously that's a long ways from here. And it's hard for me to find officers who want to talk to me because they don't think what I'm doing is valid or worthwhile. So that makes that a roadblock for me. So I have to come up with unique ways, and sometimes just by myself identifying myself, saying, hey, I am in law enforcement. I'm trying to do something good to educate the public, and I'm going to donate the proceeds from this book like I do with all of my other books. Then people open up a little bit. But it's tough. You could have somebody who's been dealing with something for years, and then it's starting to be less of a traumatic experience, and then here comes Chris, CL Swinney Chris calling you and wanting to bend your ear about it, so it can be frustrating. So whatever happens, I kind of treat it like a traffic stop. Sometimes I pull somebody over and they're okay, and sometimes they call me names, and sometimes they want to fight me. So I kind of have that. I'm looking for that same reaction when I call about these cases.
Yeah, because you never know how emotionally they're involved in it, right? So,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're talking about somebody. Ultimately, what I do is I remember that I'm talking about somebody's family member. So, on a case that I'm working live in the town that I'm working in now, if it's a family member and it's a serious case, I have to be mindful of their feelings. So if somebody says, don't ask me, or they don't want to talk about it, I drop it. And I've probably erased probably 6 or 7 novels that were almost done because I ran into somebody like that, and it just wasn't worth it for me.
Yeah. Well, there has to be integrity to it, right? So,
Right.
Now, this would be a really interesting one for you, question I'm thinking. Because you're in law enforcement as well as doing the books, now, for the most part, people I've interviewed always sort of say to me that the profilers of serial killers and these types of people are not accurate. They're not very reliable, not like we see on television shows. What's your take on that?
Well, let me see if I understood the question correctly. You've interviewed other folks, and they have said that folks who are doing profiling of serial killers are kind of off with their assessment. Yeah,
because I've interviewed a couple of people, actually a couple of profilers that were part of law enforcement in the U.S., and they're kind of saying that most serial killers that get caught don't get caught from the profiling.
Yeah, and that's true. I would agree with them. Now, that's not to say that profiling is not important. It absolutely is, because it gives you a general basis to draw some conclusions from. But ultimately, in my experience, either in my own cases, and I haven't worked a serial killer case directly, but I've worked numerous, maybe hundreds of homicide cases, and the majority of the time, profile can come in and say, hey, you're looking for a guy who's 36 years of age, possibly Hispanic, and give you this rundown. But that's usually not what we use to catch them. What typically happens, and oftentimes for serial killers, the way they're caught is two things. They either get caught in the act because they kind of let their guard down, or they get caught because they want to get caught, meaning they're done playing around, they're done playing games, they're bored, and they start leaving things and clues out there for law enforcement to get caught. But, for example, the pig farmer, Mr. Picton, he got caught based on police work but no profiling. And basically the law enforcement in Canada knew that stuff was going on at that farm, but they continually served search warrants there, and it wasn't until they finally found a piece of human remains that they broke that case open. But on another scale, like say the Killer Handyman, which is another case that's going to be coming out here soon on the 25th of September, that book's coming out. He was caught on police work, but it was based on forensics, not a profiler. And so most of the time, the profiler can give you a general idea of who you may be looking for, but oftentimes police work, or just, I got to be honest with you, dumb luck, we sometimes catch serial killers.
Yeah, and I've heard that, like they've had a parking ticket or something that's coordinated, and they get caught, and it wasn't really...
Somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just somehow something foolish like that, and we kind of joke in law enforcement that we never catch the smart ones.
Yeah. So now on this, the Robert Picton case, that's the true story of the pig farmer. So that was in a suburb of Vancouver, I believe. Abbotsford, I think, was where he was at. So maybe give the listeners a little kind of scenario, like what happened.
Okay, just like a real brief thing for him would be, Robert, his name was Robert William Picton, and he was actually raised on a pig farm. The family had a large piece of property and you know, he and his brother and sister, they worked on the farm with his mom and dad, but they didn't really know how to do the ins and outs. And what ends up happening is his parents, Robert's parents, pass away, and that left the farm to him and his sister and his brother. Well, obviously the process of taking care of pigs, slaughtering them, and then distributing them to restaurants in the area, they didn't really know how to do that, and so they started falling behind on their process there, as well as their payments. So eventually what happens is Robert decides, hey, I'm going to sell part of our property. So he inherits the farm when his parents die, and then he sells a parcel, and you know, basically overnight he's a millionaire. From that point on, he basically begins to use quite a bit of narcotics, and he kind of was alluded to of doing that before. But he, his brother, and his sister pretty much have, you know, some of the best parties you could think of on this farm. And what Robert would do is he would go down to a certain area and look for prostitutes, and he would lure them back to his farm by either telling them, hey, I'll give you narcotics, or I'll give you some cash, you know, something to that effect, to get them to come out to the farm. And they called the farm the Piggy Palace, which kind of was infamous for this case because so much crazy events occurred out there. But what Robert was doing, though, was he would bring them out there. He would lure them in from like an area called the Low Track, which was downtown east side of Vancouver. And then once he had his way with them sexually, he would then kill them in various ways. One of the ways he did it was to inject them with window washer fluid, which would be basically a pretty violent way to kill somebody. But once these women died, he would then grind them up and feed them to his pigs on the farm. And this was verified through DNA and forensic evidence after this case finally broke open. So Robert, Mr. Picton did that for quite some time, but eventually law enforcement started to look for the missing women down on the east side, and everything started pointing towards Robert in this Piggy Palace area. After that, law enforcement served a search warrant out there. They kind of came up negative with what they were looking for, but they kept listing, Robert as this person of interest for these missing women. They had not concluded that he was a killer at that time. Eventually, he gets involved with a case in which there's a big party out there. One of the people leave, and somebody who leaves basically kind of drops a dime to law enforcement saying, hey, there's other stuff going on out there, besides just partying. Law enforcement ends up going out there and doing another search warrant, and at that time they end up finding human remains in one of the pig pens, human remains in a freezer, and just kind of what you would call, the what would be a good term, the mother lode, if you will, of just, the most deviant sexual crimes you could think of. In fact, one of the things he did was he had a large dildo that he had affixed to a 22 caliber rifle, and he killed one of his victims that way. So, the guy was just kind of, had lost his mind, and he was then eventually arrested. His brother actually was not charged, nor was his sister. All of those cases that occurred out there, 49 of which he was convicted of, all fell on him, and that's basically the case in a nutshell.
Were they so the brother and sister? Do you think they just weren't involved and they didn't know about it, or?
I think the brother and sister were involved. There's no way they could have not known what Robert was doing because his brother partied with him quite often. But I just think it was one of those cases where law enforcement had to get somebody in custody. It was clear he was involved. He started making comments and bragged about killing the women. Law enforcement sent an undercover officer into the prison itself and he actually bragged about how he killed some of the women. So they knew he was involved. But when I investigated the case, it almost appeared as though law enforcement just didn't put a lot of effort into his brother and sister because they had Robert, and that by having Robert, that meant they solved over 49 homicides. 49 missing women that were homicide cases. So it was a huge case for Vancouver Police Department and the RCMPs, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Yeah, they always get their men.
Yeah.
And now, was there a was there a particular MO? Like, did he have to kill them in a certain way? Did it have to be a certain type of looking girl or age?
No, the thing about him was he was just living the life. He had no money prior, and now he came into money, and so he was living that life he always wanted to live. He fit some of the MO, though, of serial killers, where he was abused, at least physically, not sexually that we know of, but physically by his mom and dad. In fact, one of the things he would do is, instead of getting beaten by his dad, he would run onto the farm and hide into a carcass of a pig. You and I wouldn't, that doesn't cross our mind that that's what we would do when we were getting punished as a child, but that's what Robert did. So he was raised in a different environment than most people were.
So how old was he when he got the money and started the parties?
I think he was in his 40s.
So
if I believe.
Yeah. So, well, whatever. If he's kind of close to that, that's but that's not typical to just start killing at, let's say, your late 30s or 40s. You don't just turn it on and go, well, I'm just going to kill.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's why this case was so interesting. Was because my opinion of it, and even when I wrote the book, was, hey, there's more on the bone here. There's more meat on the bone.
Yeah.
Meaning I felt like there was a gap in his life that nobody really investigated or talked about. And, law enforcement, again, and I kind of criticized some of what they did in the book. And, that's hard for me to do working in law enforcement, but if we can't grow from our mistakes, then we're kind of, already behind the ball, if you will. But I criticized the police departments in that particular investigation just because I thought, how is it? I had the same question as you. How in the world does a guy go so long in life and then, not kill anybody, but then all of a sudden he kills at least 49 and possibly 200?
Yeah.
So my personal belief is that there were killings. There was something that he had done. He in his kind of mid teenage years, he watched his mom kill a kid. And she kind of dumped him into the water and left the kid there because she struck him with her truck. So he was around violence. He was around the killing of the pigs on the farm. But I think he definitely did stuff that he just never got charged with.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, because that other case up in Canada, the Luca Magnato one, was the same, where he's killing animals, and then all of a sudden goes 10 years, and then they catch him, killing and dismembering and eating that person and filming it, right? But I say the same thing. So 10 years, like you go from killing animals. Oh, I'll just do nothing for 10 years.
Right, and that kind of also rang true in the second book, The Killer Handyman, where he killed when he was younger, but then there's a 20-year gap. It goes from 76 to 96. There's a 20-year gap, but we don't know what William Patrick Fyfe did, and I guarantee you, if he did it in 76 and he does it in 96, that in between those 20 years, he definitely was involved with stuff that law enforcement does not know about.
Oh, yeah, because you just don't turn it off.
Yeah, it doesn't turn off, and normally you don't have somebody that can go. It's very rare for a serial killer to go that long, 20-plus years. They usually either get in custody for something different, or they end up dead, or killing themselves, or getting caught. There's usually something. It's very rare to have somebody go that long, and that was one of the interesting things about Picton's case as well as Fyfe's case, was how, what happened, and why did law enforcement not go back? And what they'll tell you is they did research, they did try to connect them to other cases, but they did not have enough physical evidence to bring charges against them to connect them to crimes and those gaps in their lives.
Yeah. Well, I guess sometimes it's tough to go back. It depends how far it is. But at the same time, for some sort of resolution for the victims' families of other crimes, it's kind of more important.
Yeah, well, what we're seeing in California, or at least in the United States, is that slowly these DNA databases are starting to get really big. And what they're trying to do is see if clothing or other items taken from crimes 20, 30 years ago still contain DNA on them. And so they're getting some cold cases solved. But you're right, But what I noticed too in many of these cases that I was investigating was not a lot of physical evidence was coming out. In the case of the Picton case, these women that were victims, because of their drug use and kind of their separation from their families and the life that they were choosing, because many of the women there in the low track chose to be prostitutes. They wanted to do that life. And consequently, when they were missing, these missing persons reports wouldn't come out sometimes 2 or 3 years after the fact. So a lot of the families had just kind of stepped away and kind of just said, okay, well, we're never going to see, Susie again.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of strange to me to see that. But you're right, and the closure needs to be done. And so somehow, some of the people I talked to on the Picton case said that there are cold cases connected to the missing persons, because they had what was called a women's missing persons list for that area. And there is a group of detectives still working that case, trying to ID or locate the remains of those bodies. So it's still something important to law enforcement, but it moves like a turtle. It's super slow. Yeah,
there's only so many people, so much time and effort they could put into something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure now Picton. So what did he get? A life?
Yeah, in Canada you get that 25 years with life imprisonment, but with the possibility of parole.
Right.
So I think he was gonna. I'm trying to look at my notes I had, because I had a little notes for you. But I think he's supposed to be possible to get out, I think, at the age of 90. Wow. So, but the thing about Picton that's scary is, even though he's 90, he's said that he's going to go back to doing what he knows how to do best, which is murder innocent women.
Yeah.
So,
well, if he lives, I don't
think he'll make it.
Yeah, and people like that, they still, it's pretty hard for them. It'd be like Manson. It's hard for a panel to kind of go, yeah, let him out.
Yeah, I agree.
It gets to a point, because there's too much notoriety around it, and.
Oh yeah, because whoever says, yeah, go ahead and let him go, can you imagine the press on that?
Oh yeah, you wouldn't want to be that. No.
You don't want to be that person.
No, especially nowadays. I mean, because the media is outrageous now, with everybody with phones and everything gets filmed and everything gets put on the news, and then they have to analyze it for 24 hours.
Right.
And it kind of gets overdone. So I wouldn't want to be that person. No.
Right.
And so now you got this new book, The Killer Handyman. It comes out on the 25th, I believe, is the date.
Yep, it comes out 25th of September.
And now it's so true. Now this one's is interesting because it's another Canadian. I didn't know there was serial killers up there. They're so polite. Did the serial killers say sorry? No,
No, I don't. So far, none of these people have.
No, that's terrible. I'll get some bad mail for this. So he was the killer handyman. So what did that mean? Like, he was going to people's homes and being a handyman?
Yeah. So what he did was he has kind of an interesting story about him, because for some reason, he's raised by his aunt at a young age, but then many years later, he kind of reconnects with his mom. But he has some traits of a regular, quote-unquote, regular citizen, in which he does a little schooling. He finishes or gets close to getting his high school diploma, and then he becomes kind of a handyman. But what happens with him is he ends up getting addicted to drugs, and so he moves actually to Montreal, hoping to get off drugs, and actually gets into a treatment program. And he does so well there that he actually, staff says he gets off the drugs and he becomes a counselor. But I was unable to verify that fact, and what he does later on in his life suggests that he did not get off drugs, but he actually was a person that people would say was a good handyman. He was kind of scruffy, rough around the edges a little bit, but he would do tasks as build fences, do roofs. He even put in a pool one time. And what his deal was, though, is he did that for money to support his habit, and then he moved a lot. He was kind of a drifter. He moved all around Canada, so he needed money to do that. But the reason why he's known as the Handyman Killer is because the women that he ended up murdering, it would start with him picking out a victim, and it usually was kind of a middle-aged woman who lived alone, and really what he would do is walk up to the house, knock on the door, and one of the victims would open the door, and he would say, hey, I'm William, it looks like your house needs some work, can I help you out? And if they said, oh, yeah, you can help us out, they'd invite him in, and he'd go inside, but as soon as he got inside and the door shut, it was homicidal rage. He would end up killing these women, and oftentimes he would do it for, like, money, so it would be kind of like a theft, and in a lot of cases in the beginning, he actually would, and it was suggested that he would have to torture or beat these victims to get their bank PIN card numbers, and they would give it to him, and then he would still end up killing them, which was kind of a tragedy, because it starts out as this guy being desperate, he needs money, these women give him their pins, and he ends up killing them anyway. So that's what made William so dangerous, was that he played the part of a handyman, somebody trying to help people, but yet he preyed on middle-aged women who lived alone.
Yeah. Well, so he was fairly young then, hey?
Yeah, he was young at first. Well, his whole beginnings of going down the wrong path actually started when he was 17. He got into some trouble. He went to like a home for kind of a facility for juveniles. Got out, but then when he got out, he still kind of got in a lot of trouble. He went back into custody, and in 1976, he's out on a pass from that facility, ends up killing a lady, and then just calmly returns back from his past, serves out his time, and then he kind of goes about his life. And what we learn later is that she wasn't the only victim. There was 3 or 4 other victims at that time. But then that's where we get this 20-year gap. And everybody in law enforcement out there especially wants to know what in the heck did he do in those 20 years. So it's pretty scary for me to think of what he could have done or what he did do.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. People, that's crazy. So,
yeah.
So he eventually got put away then for life, or?
Yeah, he got the same charges. So in Canada, you get the same thing. You get the 25. You get 25. What is it? 25 years, or no? You get life imprisonment with the possibility of parole in 25 years. And one of the things different in the United States versus Canada is, like you said earlier, they're not going to probably parole these people, but they could get out. In the United States, if you murder somebody, you're going to get added sentences, 5 life sentences or whatever, so that they ensure there's no way for you to get out. In Canada, you can kill one person or 1,000 and get the same sentence.
Right.
So it's kind of for me on the law enforcement side, it kind of irks me a little bit, only because I feel, for example, with Mr. Fyfe in the Killer Handyman, we find out later after he's in custody for 4 murders that he committed 5 other ones, and law enforcement, to get him to admit to those cases, they agreed to move him to a different prison because he didn't like the one he was in. So they negotiated, and he agreed, so he confessed to those 5 murders, and the details that he provided made it clear that he actually was the murderer. But he didn't get any extra time for those 5 murders. So for me, it's frustrating, but I only know, United States way of business. I don't know Canada's way of business, so that's what it was tough for me to adjust to.
Yeah. Well, I think it's apples and oranges. It's a different place. So,
right.
They don't televise the murder trials like this. So,
Yeah. Then I wish they didn't do it out here. There's a lot of things that Canada does that I really support and think is well done.
Yeah.
And I wish we didn't, because I think some of the people in the United States that do what they do are doing it just for fame.
Yeah. It becomes a circus, right?
Yeah, it is a circus, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and it's and no matter what, I still think that they all change their behaviors, because when you're televised every day and you have millions of people watching you, so the prosecutors, the defense, the judge, everybody's affected by that.
Yeah,
and it just shouldn't be. And then everybody judges, so you have, a trial going on and an officer goes up and testifies. So then for the next week, you have all this judgment about, oh, I didn't like the way he said that, or I don't like the way, and you have all this stuff going on, and it's like, that's not what it's supposed to be about, right? So
yeah, I agree with you. That's
the wrong.
I think you're correct. It impacts everybody's way of thinking, and then if you're impacting somebody's way of thinking, you're going to affect how they're making decisions.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the wrong thing. I don't think it's serving justice. I think it's serving something else, but it's certainly not getting the right answer. But
yeah, I agree. And hopefully change is coming, but it's tough. It's tough in law enforcement right now. There's a whole new thing taking over law enforcement right now with the killing of cops. We lost 8 officers in a period of 10 days 2 weeks ago, and there's a change in society. And it's happening even in Canada, where law enforcement's really under the gun, and it's hard to be under the gun and pumping gas and getting shot in the back of the head, and also going out and trying to investigate these cold murder cases or these serial killer cases. It's a handful right now. And then
but the tension in the U.S. with the police is something. Well, it's just outrageous. Cops being killed and the whole thing. Now, do you think there's a particular reason or something, in your opinion, that makes it so extreme in the U.S.?
I think so. I'm 40 years old, so I've been around a little bit, and honestly, and it's hard to admit to it, but there's been some significant mistakes made by law enforcement in the last couple of years, including law enforcement shooting an unarmed black man running away from them, that have just kind of made the people snap again. Mostly African American people are extremely frustrated, but not all of them. It's a certain group or a certain age or education or demographic situation. Overwhelmingly, law enforcement is still pretty supported in the United States, but there's a large group of people who are angry, and in some instances they have the right to be angry, and law enforcement is not doing anything to make the relationships better. But what's happening, in my opinion, is that these smaller groups, one that comes to mind is Black Lives Matter, are kind of taking it to law enforcement in a manner in which we're not prepared to deal with. And I think these folks who have mental health issues on the fringes of these groups, whether fueled by media or their own inner demons, are feeling it's acceptable to be, walk up behind a deputy pumping gas and shoot him, 16 times. I think there's a disconnect by certain demographic in our communities right now, and I see it every day. I work in patrol, which means I'm out in the general public every day, and every day during my 12-hour shift, I see all spectrums, if you will. I see people who are supportive and wave at me. I see people who run from me. I see people who try to fight me. I see people who try to bait me into comments by making comments about me or my ethnicity or my profession. They have their camera phones rolling, and they're trying to get paid. So there's so much going on right now, and what you see in the media is really kind of fueling these fires, and that's frustrating, and that's what I see. But I have friends who have said, hey, this is kind of like the 70s, where law enforcement was not really looked highly upon in the 70s. But the difference being is, you didn't have somebody in the 70s walk up to a cop and shoot him in the back of the head and then unload the entire magazine into him. You know.
Yeah, but do you think the amount of guns available in the country is an issue?
So that's an interesting thing because I was a part of a task force, and one of the responsibilities of that task force was firearms for the state. And I would say to you that I think there is an exorbitant amount of firearms in our country. And when you asked me that question, I chuckled a little bit because, you know, it's a double-edged sword to me. I feel we're allowed to, or we should be allowed to have firearms, and I think we should be able to protect ourselves. But I got to say that it's in my experience, and I'm just basing this on my 15 years in law enforcement and the hundreds of cases that I've worked, that if somebody wants a gun, they're going to get it. So if you change the laws, if you change the rules, if you do that kind of stuff, I don't think it's going to prevent what we see. You know, and I could use for examples the Sandy Hook massacre at the elementary school. That mom owned those guns legally and had those guns locked up in her home. Her son murdered her, got her guns from the safe, and then went to the school and did what he did. You know, so that's legally possessed guns in the hands of a psychopathic killer.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, I see that. I just sort of think that that there, it's a real touchy subject. I think that not control, but some sort of responsibility or regulation has to be put on it. Because I don't think it's because there's too many other countries that don't have as big of issue, and they have more regulations. And
I don't have a problem. And I'm law enforcement, so it doesn't necessarily mean I'm gung ho for guns. I don't have a massive arsenal at my home. I'm not saying that we all should get every gun we could possibly own and that kind of thing. I'm with you on certain respects, but for me on law enforcement, I get, for lack of better terms, handcuffed. For example, some of what the Obama administration wants to do with firearms, that impacts me on a professional level and a personal level by him and his administration suggesting we get rid of assault rifles, for example. That means when I go to work and I run into somebody who has one from the pre-existing tens of thousands in the United States, I'm severely undergunned. And an example would be the bank robberies in L.A., in which officers had to go into a gun store to get assault rifles to challenge and end up incapacitating those two bank robbers. That changed law enforcement tremendously, and it changed guns, in my opinion. Guns have always been in our country.
Right.
I've read a lot about the Winchester family and some of the other large families and gun manufacturers, and the United States has some of the biggies in the world. So they're here, and those companies have a lot of money to fight any kind of change in policy. So I think that battle is continuing to happen behind closed doors, but it's coming our way. But I wouldn't, as a law enforcement official, wouldn't have a problem with more regulations if it would make sense for law enforcement to still do their job, but also protect Americans with their rights, per the Constitution. So, that's tough. Like you said, it's a touchy subject. It really is. Yeah,
it is. Well, the gun culture is part of America, and that's just what it is. And that's just,
I agree.
You can't really compare it to other countries, but I think that they should, even if they, regulate it some instances, it might help in some cases. It couldn't make it worse, but they shouldn't be taking it away from law enforcement. You guys need what you need. I'm thinking more about, there's some people that can just pick up guns, in different shows and different things without really.
Yeah, we see that problem a lot. So we have Nevada next to California, obviously, and there's, almost once a month a gun show in Nevada, in Reno, Nevada. And you can buy stuff there that you can't get in California because California has tougher but these task forces are up there specifically working those gun shows, and when they cross the line, these people are getting arrested. But it's hundreds of people with only 10 agents. So how do you do it? Like, how do you enforce it? And in Nevada, with their laws, it's all good what they're doing. But in California, some of the stuff they're bringing in, like high-capacity magazines or silencers or fully automatic weapons and that kind of stuff, it's not legal in California, I mean, I'm a law enforcement officer. I'm not allowed to have a fully automatic weapon in California. So, and I don't have a problem with that. And I'm also with you. If you could change some of the regulations and prevent just one massacre, I think it makes sense,
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It's just probably never happened in our life, but
probably not. But we can both at least sound like we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, we can at least pretend, So now I've noticed on both books you have Peter Vronsky and of course R.J. Parker. They're good friends of the show. It's actually Peter Vronsky's doing a launch for one of my other shows, Dark Shadows.
Cool.
A 2-hour premiere. Actually, we've done a lot of pre-recording for it. So
that's cool.
Really good guy. I really like Peter. So what was it like to work with them?
It's been pretty good. Just communicating via email. I haven't actually met up with him in person, but RJ's Parker is saying, "Hey, you need to talk to Peter," and Peter is saying, "Hey, this guy referring to me looks like he can write pretty good, so let's come together and start doing stuff." So I'm the newbie. Peter and RJ have been in the business longer than I have, especially when it comes to true crime writing. So I've deferred a lot of my questions or thoughts or things like that to them, and they've been completely supportive, and for some reason, the first book, the Robert Picton Pig Farmer Killer, was #1, and it's been on a bestsellers list since several bestseller lists since it came out, and then the second one is on bestseller list right now, and it's just available for pre-order. So having guys like that in the business, well-known, well-respected, and them giving me a bit of their time for me to bounce questions off of them has just been huge, and I always try to thank them as much as I can, so It's been pretty cool.
Yeah, you're pretty lucky to be with them. And Peter, I think that's amazing. He was went over to Russia back when Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president, hey? And
yeah,
he was the first person granted permission to go over and interview all of his friends over there and stuff.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's pretty awesome stuff, yeah. I mean, I find that stuff fascinating. The more that I'm digging into my writing career as a true crime writer, I reading all his stuff and looking at his interviews, and it's just pretty awesome to see that, and I kind of try to model some of what I'm doing around the success that he's had.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it'll only help. And so, what kind of influences do you have outside of the work in that? So, do you read certain books, or watch certain movies, or listen to certain music?
I do a lot of reading, and I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that I kind of look a lot at Anne Rule. I liked her way and her style, and I thought it was kind of fascinating, some of the stuff that she has written over the years. And I haven't read all of her stuff yet, but I'm trying to catch up, if you will, in that area. So I read a lot, and then I watch a lot of videos and a lot of film on serial killing or true crime stuff. And I got to be honest with you, a lot of it I started looking at when I was trying to solve homicide cases in the San Jose area. Only because I was thinking some of my cases had some connections or some weird things that kept popping up, and I was wondering if there was clues there that we were missing and stuff. So, I do a lot of reading. I watch a lot of videos and film and stuff. That's kind of like my influence. And then, working in law enforcement for 15 years, I've worked all throughout California. I've been all across the country as a presenter for things that I've done and my expertise and stuff. And I get a lot of kind of input from folks that I meet throughout the country, too. So that's kind of where I get my input.
And so you, Zodiac.
Yeah, the Zodiac
'Cause you're in
Killer.
the
I was
Bay,
reading about
right?
that a couple months ago.
Yeah. So, what do you think about that? Did you ever kind of come up with a thought in your mind of how that went? And
It's funny, when I was reading it just about maybe 2 months ago or so, I was reading that, and I was just thinking to myself that it would be interesting, just me personally, to look at the files, and have a chance to kind of dive in there and see what I see. So many things have been speculated about that case as far as, did he die or is he dead? Were there two of them? There was some interesting stuff, but I got to say that as far as intelligence goes, and I think one of the premier reasons why that person was never captured in my mind was because he was too smart. When you find somebody, and a lot of these serial killers are on the edge of being brilliant, and some of them are just, they have mental issues and their wires are crossed wrong, but some of them are borderline brilliant, sometimes even genius. And that case, to me, is fascinating, but one of the things I find interesting is that so far no person has been identified as a suspect. A lot of theories, a lot of speculation, but in law enforcement or true crime, I don't know if you can get away with speculation,
Yeah, no. It's just funny because we've had a lot of interviews this last, over the summer, and because there's been a lot of books lately, and of course there's all different theories. You're right. So it's been kind of bubbling up again. So
yeah, I did notice that, and I was wondering, trying to find out why, and I think it's because, at least one of my thoughts on it is because it's such a fascinating case, and nobody ever figured it out.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
And that, I think that fact alone, the fact that we don't have answers, I think it really bothers
and then
people.
Why did it stop?
Yeah, and the theories on that. There was a book that I ordered when I was looking at this a couple months ago called The Most Dangerous Animal of All, and it's Searching for My Father and Finding the Zodiac Killer by Gary Stewart and Susan Mustafa. So I'm supposed to, that's on my to-do list of reading that book, but that book seems kind of interesting, and I noticed it's a pretty serious bestseller, and it's through HarperCollins, which is one of the biggies, so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I was lucky. I had more, the ZodiacKillerSite.com, and then I had Tom Horan just did another book too, right? The Revisited.
Okay.
And that's pretty interesting too. I like the theory about how, because he talks mainly about the letters and how they are different.
Yeah, that's what I noticed too when I was looking at it, was that I felt like they were different as well, and that's why there was that theory, or at least one of them was that, this guy, the original Zodiac Killer's son, was taking over, and or somebody connected to that case was taking over. But I agree with him. I think the letters are different.
Yeah, that's what
and
he said.
And it then begs the question as whether or not the second ones are legit or not,
Yeah, or if it's the same, or if it was more than one killer.
Right.
And there's also the fact that he also brought up how, in the first letter, how there was things mentioned in it that they only had in the police report. And that letter was at the newspaper before the police report. They could have had it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he picked up some really interesting things. Like that's a good book if you're interested. And I know it's been hot because the interview's been having huge amounts of follows. Like it's still getting loaded at 200 a week. And this is
wow. And what was his name? Tom?
Tom Horan. He's Professor Thomas Horan. And,
Thomas Horan. Okay.
And but
I'll check it out because I'm like you, very interested in that case. And what you're saying that he's discovered sounds pretty awesome. I'd love to see.
It's just really interesting. I mean, you can't. I mean, we're probably never going to really resolve what happened, but it's just I find it really fascinating that there's new things that come out, new perspectives, a way of looking at it, and it's really, really interesting. The thing I like about it was that it was more, it was just an evidence sort of thing. It wasn't like he was trying to tell you this is why and this is how. He was just like, look at the differences and look at how these things happened.
Oh, that's cool.
And it makes
yeah,
you
so
kind
he's
of
not really, he's not forcing something down your throat, but he's just saying, hey, check out this stuff, and here's what it might mean.
He's just questioning some of the things and kind of going, hey, what's going on here, and why did this happen? And it's kind of, it makes you go, yeah, like why? You know, he takes a lot of things into account that I like too. I like writers that go back to the time and think about how police communicated back then in the 60s. It's different than now. Right.
Oh yeah.
And how everything, and even the newspapers, and how it was just a different time. You know, people, listeners, I get this all the time because we'll be talking about things and they don't realize how long it took for information to get out.
Right.
You know.
Oh, back then it would take forever.
Yeah. It was. It's crazy. It wasn't so instant.
Oh yeah. Nowadays it's pretty darn instant, especially with smartphones and all the other stuff. But back then, it would take a long time. You're right. Yeah,
and you know, and I came along in the '60s, so but I'll tell you, it's just like because we did cover JFK and RFK and all that, and it's pretty amazing to watch RFK come out and give one of his speeches, and at the beginning he had to tell the crowd that Martin Luther King had been shot, and it happened the day before.
Oh wow!
And people were crying, so they didn't even know the next day.
Holy cow.
And I was like, wow, it was that bad in the early 60s. Like, it was really, because there were so many people that didn't have a television, and if they did, they didn't have, let's say, more than a channel. It just wasn't such a big factor in their life.
Right.
Interesting. I was really surprised, but, you know, you can watch the films. Like, there's so much available now, and it's just like, it blows me away every time I go back and go through old history because it, you know.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I was born in the middle '70s, so, but for me, all this technology and the way data travels and stuff is just starting to catch on. But my kids, they laugh at me with my old devices and not being able to keep up with them. You know. Yeah,
but you know what? You just tell them, look, in 20 years. Everything that they use right now that they're all really hot on, and hey, you're old and all this. In 20 years, it'll all be old dinosaurs. It'll be like dial-up phones to them.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and their kids will be going, "You're so old," with whatever else is going on, because you know it goes that fast. I mean, I still have
definitely flying.
Yeah, I still have 6 VCR players. I don't know. I don't use them. Any of those. I don't use them.
I remember what they look like, and I did use them.
And I have some TVs, too, that have the big tubes, right? But I just feel really guilty about throwing stuff like that out.
Yeah, I remember those devices, but out here in California especially, they're so big on recycling that they want you to get rid of those in the electrical recycling bins and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So we kind of do that just without even thinking about it, you know.
Yeah, it's just crazy, but it's just crazy how, you know, perfectly good things, and we just keep. But anyway, that's enough about my age.
That's funny.
Well, you know, it's certainly been interesting. Great conversation.
I appreciate your time, Al. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been very good. So,
it's been awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much, and we have to do it again. This is.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm gonna definitely keep writing, and hopefully I can keep being a part of your program.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, anytime. I'd love to have you on again. That'd be fantastic.
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And now you have a good night.
You too, sir. Bye-bye. The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end! I'll see you.
This has been a production of the Z-Talk Radio Network.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.